Let me ask you something tonight. When was the last time you checked in on the dream you buried? Not the one you talk about, not the one you post about, the one you promised yourself when nobody was watching. Somewhere between survival and responsibility, between paying bills and pleasing people, between I'll do it later and maybe next year. You forgot. You forgot the fire you once had. You forgot the courage you once walked in. You forgot the life you swore you would never settle for. And tonight, I didn't come to entertain you. I didn't come to motivate you for a moment. I came to remind you there was a moment in your life before fear got loud, before doubt took the microphone, before comfort put you to sleep, when you knew who you were becoming. You made a promise not to your parents, not to society, not to social media. You made a promise to you. You said, I will not live small. You said, I will not die with potential still inside me. You said, I will become everything I was created to be. But life happened, pain happened, disappointment happened. And instead of adjusting the plan, you started shrinking the dream. But hear me clearly tonight. The dream didn't die. The promise didn't expire. The calling didn't leave you. It's just been waiting for you to remember who you are. And this message, this moment is your wake-up call. Let me take you back for a moment, back to a version of you that still believed without permission, back to a time when your dreams didn't need approval, when your vision didn't need validation, when your faith in what you could become was louder than your fear of what could go wrong. There was a moment in your life when you could see it so clearly. Not just wish for it, not just hope for it. You could see it, the life, the growth, the impact, the becoming. And I need you to hear this with everything in you tonight. You did not imagine that vision. You didn't make it up. You weren't being unrealistic. You weren't being dramatic. You were being introduced to something that belonged to you. Too many people walk around pretending they never had a dream because it hurts less than admitting they abandoned it. We rewrite history to protect our disappointment. We say things like, I was young, or I didn't know better, or that was never realistic anyway. But the truth is, deep down, you know there was a moment when something inside you lit up, a moment when your spirit leaned forward, a moment when your heart said, this is it. And just because time passed, just because life interrupted you, just because people doubted you, does not mean that moment was a lie. That vision came to you before you were ready, because destiny never waits for convenience. It shows up early. It shows up when you're underqualified, under-resourced, and underestimated. And that's why it scared you. That's why you talked yourself out of it. That's why you listened to voices that sounded practical, but were really just afraid. You didn't stop dreaming because you stopped believing. You stopped because believing started to cost you something. It cost you comfort. It cost you approval. It cost you the version of yourself that fit in. And so you learn how to survive instead of how to pursue. You learn how to manage expectations instead of expand capacity. You learn how to be responsible instead of relentless. And survival will keep you breathing, but it will never make you feel alive. That's why you can be functioning and still feel empty. That's why you can be busy and still feel unfulfilled. That's why you can be successful on paper and still feel like something is missing. Because the vision you once had is still knocking from the inside, asking why you stopped listening. Let me say this clearly. The fact that you can still feel the ache is proof that the dream is still alive. Dead dreams don't haunt you. Dead visions don't whisper at night. Dead callings don't make you restless in rooms you once prayed to be in. If it still stirs you, if it still challenges you, if it still makes you uncomfortable with mediocrity, then it's not over. You didn't miss it. You delayed it. And delay is painful, but it's not fatal unless you decide to stay there. Some of you didn't quit because you failed. You quit because you succeeded at something smaller and settled there. You achieved enough to get comfortable, but not enough to feel complete. And comfort has a way of convincing you that this is all there is. It tells you, be grateful, don't rock the boat, don't ask for more. But the same voice telling you to be grateful is also silencing the voice that once told you to be great. Gratitude should ground you, not cage you. You don't need a new dream. You don't need a new vision. You don't need another motivational quote or another year to think about it. What you need is the courage to admit that you once saw yourself differently and you like that version of you. You need the honesty to say, I've been living beneath my own potential without drowning in guilt or shame. Because this is not about beating yourself up. This is about waking yourself up. That vision didn't come from nowhere. It came from who you are at your core. Before life tried to edit you, before fear tried to water you down, before disappointment tried to harden you. And just because you've changed does not mean it's gone. It's been waiting for you to grow into it, not away from it. The problem was never that the dream was too big. The problem was that you stopped growing. So stop pretending you never saw. Stop acting like you don't remember the promise you made when your heart was still brave. Stop lying to yourself just to make today more comfortable. Because the most painful regret is not failure. It's forgetting who you were called to be and living like you never knew. Tonight is not about going backward. It's about reclaiming what was always yours and finally having the courage to say, I remember now and I'm not walking away again. Let me tell you something most people will never warn you about. The greatest threat to your destiny will not come dressed like chaos, tragedy, or failure. It won't announce itself with pain or crisis. It won't knock down your door. It will come quietly. It will come politely. It will come dressed as stability, routine, and good enough. Comfort is dangerous not because it hurts you, but because it numbs you. It doesn't fight your purpose head on. It gently rocks it to sleep while convincing you that rest and resignation are the same thing. Comfort never asks you to quit. It just asks you to stop reaching. It whispers, you've done enough, when there's more inside you. It says, why risk what you have for what you might lose? It teaches you how to preserve instead of pursue, how to maintain instead of multiply. And the most deceptive thing about comfort is that it rewards you just enough to make you afraid of change. You become so busy protecting what you built that you forget why you started building in the first place. At first, comfort feels like a blessing. After struggle, it feels like relief. After sacrifice, it feels like peace. And there's nothing wrong with rest, but comfort isn't rest, It restores you for the journey. Comfort convinces you the journey is over. That's why so many people stop growing, not because they are tired, but because they are settled. They confuse being safe with being fulfilled. They confuse being busy with being called. They confuse routine with purpose. Comfort will let you repeat the same year 10 times and call it a life. It will let you lower your expectations while increasing your explanations. It will teach you how to rationalize stagnation. You start saying things like, this is just how things are, or I should be thankful for what I have, or at least it's stable, and stability is good. But stability without progress becomes a cage with padded walls. You don't feel trapped because nothing hurts, but something is missing, and that missing piece is growth. The most dangerous moment in your life is not when everything is falling apart. It's when everything is just good enough to keep you from asking for more, because desperation will push you to change, but comfort will convince you to stay. Pain has a way of waking you up. Comfort has a way of putting you back to sleep. That's why some people never leave environments that are draining them, not because they don't see the cost, but because the price of change feels higher than the pain of staying. Comfort slowly trains you to avoid risk. You stop trying new things. You stop believing for bigger things. You stop challenging yourself. You stop dreaming out loud. Not because you lost ability, but because you gained fear of disruption, fear of failure, fear of starting over. And comfort feeds that fear by reminding you of everything you could lose, while never mentioning everything you are losing by staying the same. Let me say this clearly. If your life never requires courage anymore, comfort has taken over. Purpose always demands something from you. It stretches you. It interrupts you. It pulls you out of familiarity. Growth is uncomfortable by design. If you are always comfortable, you are not growing. You are coasting, and coasting always moves downhill. Comfort doesn't just affect what you do, it affects who you become. It softens your edge. It dulls your hunger. It quiets your urgency. You stop feeling the pressure of time, even though time never stops moving. You tell yourself you'll do it later, not realizing that later is comfort's favorite lie. Later sounds responsible. Later sounds reasonable. Later sounds safe. But later is where dreams go to wait, and waiting too long turns vision into regret. Some of you are not stuck because you lack opportunity. You're stuck because you're comfortable with predictability. You know how this chapter works. You know what tomorrow looks like. You know how much effort it takes to stay where you are. And the unknown scares you more than the unfulfilled life you're currently living. So you choose familiarity over faith. You choose routine over risk. You choose comfort over calling. But hear this, every being you truly want lives on the other side of discomfort. Every level you desire requires a version of you that comfort is actively trying to suppress. The reason your spirit feels restless is because it was never designed to settle. You were built to expand, to evolve, to stretch. And every time you choose comfort over growth, you silence a part of yourself that was meant to rise. Comfort is not evil, but it is dangerous when it becomes your goal instead of your reward. You were never meant to live your whole life protecting what you have. You were meant to build, to risk, to grow, to become. And the moment you realize comfort has been costing you your future is the moment you decide to stand up again, feel the discomfort, and move forward. Because staying comfortable is far more expensive than you've been willing to admit. Let me break a lie that's been sitting quietly in your mind for far too long. The lie that says you failed. Not struggled, not stumbled, not learned, failed. Because somewhere along the way, you started defining your life by outcomes instead of direction. You looked at where you are and compared it to where you thought you'd be by now. And instead of asking what shifted, you labeled yourself as the problem. But I need you to hear this with clarity and compassion. You didn't fail. Your focus shifted. And when focus shifts, progress doesn't disappear. It just moves in another direction. There was a season when your energy was aligned with your vision. You were intentional. You were hungry. You were aware of what mattered and what didn't. You protected your time. You guarded your thoughts. You were selective with your yes because your purpose demanded discipline. But slowly, without a dramatic collapse, your attention began to drift. Not because you were lazy, but because life started making demands that felt urgent. And urgency has a way of hijacking focus if you're not careful. You didn't wake up one day and decide to abandon your dream. You got distracted. Responsibilities piled up. Expectations increased. People needed things from you. Problems required immediate solutions. And little by little, you started giving your best energy to what was loud instead of what was meaningful. You focused on putting out fires instead of building the future. And before you knew it, you were exhausted, busy all day, yet strangely disconnected from the life you once felt called to live. Focus is powerful because it determines what you feed. What you focus on grows. What you focus away from shrinks. And when your focus shifts from vision to survival, from purpose to pressure, from growth to maintenance, the results change. Not because you're incapable, but because your attention is divided. You can't move powerfully in a direction you're no longer looking toward. So when progress slowed, you assumed you failed. When in reality, you stopped fueling the thing that once moved you forward. The enemy of your future was never failure. It was misali. Jinment. You were still moving, just not toward what mattered most to you. You were productive, just not purposeful. You were achieving, just not advancing. And that's why it feels so confusing. Because on the outside, it looks like you're doing okay. But on the inside, something feels off. That disconnect isn't failure. It's a signal. A signal that your focus needs recalibration. Let's be honest, some of you started focusing on proving people wrong instead of becoming who you were meant to be. Some of you started focusing on approval instead of alignment. Some of you started focusing on comfort instead of calling. And the moment your focus changed, your decisions followed, your habits followed, your standards followed. Not because you didn't care, but because you stopped checking in with yourself. You stopped asking, is this feeding my future or just funding my present? You didn't lose your ability. You didn't lose your intelligence. You didn't lose your anointing, your creativity, your drive. You just spread it too thin across too many things that didn't deserve it. Focus doesn't disappear. It gets reassigned. And right now, your energy may be invested in places that keep you busy but don't make you better. That's not failure. That's misplaced attention. Here's the good news. What focus broke, focus can rebuild. You don't need to start over from scratch. You need to start paying attention again. You need to decide what deserves your best hours, your sharpest thinking, your deepest effort. You need to stop reacting to life and start directing it. Focus is a choice, not a feeling. And the moment you choose to realign, momentum begins to return. Stop shaming yourself for seasons where you were learning how to survive. Survival seasons teach you resilience, but they're not meant to become your permanent address. You were never meant to live on autopilot, responding to whatever demands the loudest attention. You were designed to lead your life with intention, and intention begins with focus. So don't call yourself a failure. Failures quit caring. Failures stop reflecting. Failures stop listening. The fact that you feel this tension, this dissatisfaction, this pull towards something more, that's evidence that your purpose is still active. Your focus just needs to come home. Tonight is not about regret. It's about recognition. Recognition that you still have time. Recognition that your direction can change. Recognition that your future is not canceled. It's waiting for you to look at it again. When you realign your focus with your vision, you'll realize you were never as far off as you thought. You weren't failing. You were just looking the wrong way. Let me speak to the part of you that has been quietly disqualifying itself. The part that keeps replaying old mistakes, old wounds, old chapters as evidence that you are somehow no longer eligible for the future you once believed in. Somewhere along the way, pain convinced you that it had authority over what? Our destiny. That what hurt you had the right to define you, that because you went through something, you were now limited by it. But hear this clearly and without hesitation, your past pain does not disqualify your future purpose. It never did. Pain has a way of lying to us. It tells us that because something broke, we are broken. Because something failed, we are failures. Because something ended, we are finished. But pain is not a verdict, it's a process. And processes are designed to shape, not to sentence. You went through what you went through not to end you, but to deepen you, not to remove your calling, but to refine your capacity to carry it. Some of you are holding yourself hostage to moments you survived. You made it through, but you never moved past it. You keep revisiting the scene, replaying the words, reliving the loss as if understanding the pain more deeply will somehow heal it. But all it's doing is anchoring you to a version of yourself that no longer exists. You are not who you were when it hurt. You are who you became because it hurt. There are things that happened to you that were unfair, things that were undeserved, things you didn't choose, and there are things you did choose, decisions you wish you could undo, steps you wish you had taken differently. Both can produce shame if you let them. But shame is not the voice of wisdom. It's the voice of fear trying to keep you small. Shame says you should have known better. Purpose says you know better now. And knowing better is not a curse. It's qualification. Pain introduces you to parts of yourself you would have never met otherwise. Strength you didn't know you had. Boundaries you didn't know you needed. Discernment you didn't know you were missing. Compassion you couldn't have learned in comfort. The very things you think disqualify you are the things that prepared you. Your sensitivity came from surviving insensitivity. Your wisdom came from walking through confusion. Your resilience came from getting back up when you had every reason to stay down. But if you're not careful, you'll let your pain turn into an identity instead of a chapter. You'll start saying, this is just who I am now, when really it's just where you've been. And living from pain instead of learning from it will keep you reacting instead of creating. Purpose doesn't erase your past. It redeems it. It takes what tried to destroy you and uses it as evidence that you can endure more than you thought. Let me tell you something important. Purpose doesn't require a perfect past. It requires a willing present. The future doesn't ask you to be unscarred. It asks you to be available. Scars are not signs of weakness. They are proof of survival. And survival is not something to be ashamed of. You didn't get here by accident. You didn't endure by luck. You're still standing because something in you refused to quit, even when quitting would have been understandable. Some of you are waiting to feel ready before you move forward, but readiness doesn't come from the absence of pain. It comes from the decision to not let pain have the final word. You don't heal by avoiding purpose. You heal by stepping into it. Movement brings clarity. Obedience brings restoration. And the more you walk in alignment with who you are becoming, the less power your past has over you. Stop measuring your worth by your worst moments. Stop letting a season of pain rewrite the narrative of your entire life. You are not behind. You are informed. You are not damaged. You are developed. You are not disqualified. You are different. And different is often exactly what purpose requires. Your future is not asking you to deny your past. It's asking you to stop living in it. What happened to you may explain you, but it does not own you. And what you did may have shaped you, but it does not sentence you. The fact that you are still breathing, still dreaming, still wrestling with purpose is proof that your story is not over. Pain had its moment. It does not get your future. Let me say something that might challenge the way you've been thinking. Fear is not something you overcome once and never see again. Fear is something that shows up every time you are about to grow. And the mistake many people make is believing they can reason with it, bargain with it, or wait it out. But fear is not interested in compromise. Fear doesn't want peace. It wants control. And every time you sit down at the table to negotiate with it, you slowly give away pieces of your future. Fear speaks in a calm voice. It sounds logical. It sounds responsible. It rarely tells you to stop completely. It just tells you to slow down, to be careful, to wait a little longer. It dresses itself as wisdom, but underneath it is avoidance. And the more you listen, the more authority it gains. Fear is not loud because it doesn't need to be. It survives on repetition. The more you entertain it, the more familiar it becomes, until hesitation starts feeling normal and courage starts feeling reckless. Negotiating with fear usually starts with good intentions. You tell yourself you're just being cautious. You tell yourself timing matters. You tell yourself you'll move when conditions improve. But fear loves conditions because conditions are never perfect. There will always be something missing, something uncertain, something unresolved. And fear will always find a reason to delay your obedience, not because it cares about your safety, but because it knows momentum is dangerous to its existence. Every time fear says, not yet, it's really saying, stay where you are. And staying doesn't feel like disobedience. It feels like patience. But patience is active. Fear-based waiting is passive. Patience prepares. Fear procrastinates. And the longer you delay, the heavier the decision feels, because fear grows stronger in stillness. Motion weakens it. Action exposes it. But as long as you keep negotiating, fear remains unchallenged. Fear is a terrible advisor because it only shows you what could go wrong, never what could go right. It magnifies risk and minimizes reward. It keeps you staring at worst-case scenarios while ignoring the cost of never trying. It never asks you how much it hurts to stay the same. It never shows you the quiet regret that builds when years pass and you realize you live beneath your potential because you were afraid to be seen, afraid to fail, afraid to outgrow familiar spaces. The problem isn't that fear exists. The problem is that you've been letting it vote. Fear is allowed to inform you, but it is not allowed to decide for you. Courage doesn't mean the absence of fear. It means the refusal to let fear make the final call. The moment you stop negotiating is the moment you reclaim authority over your life. You don't wait for fear to leave. You move while it's talking. Some of you have been having the same internal conversation for years. You keep revisiting the same decision, the same idea, the same calling. Every time you get close, fear raises a new concern. And you mistake that for discernment when really it's resi. Stance. Discernment brings clarity. Fear brings confusion. Discernment leads to peace. Fear leads to paralysis. If the voice you're listening to keeps you stuck, it's not guiding you, it's guarding its own comfort. Fear doesn't need to defeat you, it just needs to delay you. Because delayed obedience often turns into missed opportunity. Not because the opportunity disappears, but because you change. You get tired. You get distracted, you settle. And settling feels easier than fighting a fear you should have confronted early. The longer you wait, the more invested you become in staying where you are, and the harder it feels to move. Let me remind you of this. Fear has never been a reliable indicator of danger. It's an indicator of importance. You don't feel fear around things that don't matter. Fear shows up when something has the power to change you. That's why it gets loud when you're close to growth. That's why it intensifies when you're about to step out of alignment with your old patterns. Fear doesn't mean stop. It often means step forward. Stop asking fear for permission. Stop waiting for it to approve your next move. Fear will never tell you it's time. You decide it's time, and when you decide, fear loses leverage. It may still whisper, but it won't be in control. You don't defeat fear by understanding it. You defeat it by acting in spite of it. Action interrupts fear's narrative. Movement proves that fear was exaggerating. And every step you take without negotiating weakens its hold. The life you want is on the other side of a conversation you've been having with fear for too long. It's time to end the negotiations, stand up and move forward, afraid if necessary, uncertain if required, but committed regardless. Because fear doesn't disappear when you wait, it disappears when you lead. Let me speak to the resistance you feel every time you get close to growth, the hesitation, the excuses, the subtle pull to stay where you are. That resistance is not random. It's not because the path is wrong. It's because the life you say you want requires a version of you you've been postponing. And the truth most people avoid is this: you don't get a new level without a new self. Elevation always comes with confrontation, not with the world, but with you. You can want more and still resist becoming more. You can pray for change and still cling to habits that keep you familiar. You can dream about transformation while avoiding the discipline it demands. Growth is not just about acquiring new things, it's about releasing old patterns. And letting go is often harder than holding on, even when what you're holding is limiting you. There is a version of you that can handle the pressure of what you're asking for, but that version doesn't exist yet. It has to be built. And building it means facing parts of yourself you've learned to ignore: your procrastination, your inconsistency, your fear of accountability, your comfort with distraction. The life you desire, why? LL expose everything in you that's misaligned with it. That's not punishment. That's preparation. Many people say they want change, but what they really want is addition without subtraction. They want success without sacrifice, growth without discomfort, new results without new routines. But life doesn't work that way. Every upgrade requires an update, and updates often disrupt systems that once worked. That's why growth feels like loss before it feels like gain. You're not losing yourself. You're shedding versions of you that can't go where you're headed. The version of you you've been avoiding is not weaker. It's more disciplined, more focused, more honest, more accountable. That version wakes up earlier, says no more often, sets boundaries without guilt, and chooses long-term fulfillment over short-term relief. And that version threatens the comfort of who you are now, so your current self resists it. Not because it's bad, but because change feels like death to the familiar. You don't rise to the level of your desires. You rise to the level of your identity. If your identity still sees yourself as someone who starts but doesn't finish, who plans but doesn't execute, who believes but doesn't act, then no amount of motivation will sustain you. Identity determines behavior. And the reason you keep cycling back to the same place is not lack of vision. It's loyalty to an old self-image. The life you want demands integrity. It demands consistency when no one is watching. It demands humility to learn and courage to unlearn. It demands that you stop blaming circumstances and start taking responsibility for your choices, not in a harsh way, but in an empowered way. Because responsibility is not a burden, it's authority. When you own your growth, you reclaim your power. You've been waiting to feel ready, but readiness doesn't precede growth, it follows commitment. You become ready by doing what's uncomfortable long enough for it to become normal. The version of you you need is not created in inspiration. It's forged in repetition, in the quiet decisions, in the unseen discipline, in the daily choice to align your actions with your intentions. And yes, becoming that version of you will cost you. It will cost you excuses. It will cost you certain relationships that are built on the old you. It will cost you patterns that once helped you cope, but now hold you back. It will cost you the comfort of being misunderstood, because growth often isolates before it connects. But what it gives you in return is alignment, peace, momentum. a life that finally feels like it fits. Stop avoiding the mirror. Stop postponing the work. Stop waiting for permission to become who you already know you're capable of being. The life you want is not avoiding you. You are avoiding the version of yourself required to live it. And the moment you stop resisting that version, everything begins to shift. Growth is not asking you to become someone else. It's asking you to become more Holmes. More disciplined, more intentional than you've ever been. And that version of you is not your enemy, it's your future. Let me be honest with you in a way that cuts through excuses but still carries grace. Waiting is not neutral. We like to think delay is harmless, that postponing a decision doesn't really cost us anything. We tell ourselves we're being wise, patient, or strategic. But delayed obedience always has a price, and most of the time, that price is time you will never get back. Time is the one resource you cannot replenish, and every moment you hesitate when you already know what you should do, you are spending it without realizing the cost. Delayed obedience doesn't feel like disobedience. That's why it's so dangerous. It feels reasonable. It feels responsible. It feels like you're still considering, still praying, still thinking it through. But clarity doesn't increase with delay. It fades. The longer you wait, the more complicated the decision becomes because fear, doubt, and distraction begin to pile on. What was once simple becomes heavy. What was once clear becomes confusing. And eventually, what could have been obedience turns into regret disguised as maturity. There was a moment when you knew, a moment when the instruction was clear, when the nudge was strong, when the inner voice didn't whisper, it spoke. But instead of moving, you paused. You said later. And later turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. And now you look back and wonder why things didn't change, not realizing that the opportunity was connected to the timing, not just the action. Delayed obedience doesn't just cost time, it costs momentum. Momentum is fragile. It thrives on movement and dies in hesitation. When you act quickly on what you know, energy follows you. Resources align. Confidence grows. But when you delay, momentum leaks out quietly. You don't notice it leaving, but you feel its absence later. Things that once felt possible now feel heavy. Steps that once felt exciting now feel intimidating. Not because the calling changed, but because the delay weakened your resolve. Every season has a window. Not everything is meant to be acted on immediately, but some things are. And wisdom is knowing the difference. The problem is, fear often disguises itself as wisdom. It tells you to wait until you feel more secure, more prepared, more confident. But obedience rarely comes with emotional readiness. It comes with trust. And trust requires movement before certainty. The longer you delay, the more you start adapting to a life you were only meant to pass through. You build routines around disobedience. You make peace with situations that were supposed to be temporary. You adjust your expectations downward so the discomfort of waiting doesn't feel so sharp. And eventually, you forget that this wasn't the plan. Delay slowly rewrites your standards, and you start calling survival a strategy. Delayed obedience also costs you sensitivity. The more you ignore what you know, the quieter your inner conviction becomes. Not because it leaves, but because you've trained yourself not to respond. Awareness dulls when it's not acted upon. That's why the first nudge is usually the strongest. Each ignored instruction makes the next one easier to dismiss. And over time, you don't feel led, you feel stuck. Not because direction is gone, but because responsiveness is. And here's the part most people don't like to admit. Delayed obedience often affects more than just you. Your hesitation can delay someone else's breakthrough. Your inaction can stall a connection, an opportunity, a contribution that was never meant to stop with you. You don't always know who is connected to your yes, but delay creates a ripple effect just as obedience does. This is not about condemnation. This is about awareness. Because the moment you recognize the cost, you also recognize the power you still have. Obedience doesn't demand perfection. It demands willingness. It doesn't ask you to have everything figured out. It asks you to move with what you know now. You cannot reclaim lost time, but you can redeem the time you still have by choosing differently today. Stop waiting for conditions to improve. Stop waiting for fear to disappear. Stop waiting for confirmation you've already received. The price of delay is too high, and the excuse of later is too expensive. Action doesn't guarantee comfort, but delay guarantees stagnation. The moment you move, clarity returns, momentum rebuilds, confidence grows, and what felt heavy begins to feel possible again. Obedience is not about speed, it's about alignment. And alignment, even when delayed, still has the power to shift everything when you finally decide that waiting has cost you enough. Let me speak to the version of you that remembers. The younger you, the one who dreamed without permission, who believed without proof, who imagined a future before life told you what was realistic. Somewhere along the way, that version of you is still watching, still listening, still waiting. And one day, whether you like it or not, you will have to answer to them. You will owe them an explanation. Not made of excuses, not wrapped in reasons, but rooted in truth. Your younger self didn't know everything, but they knew enough to dream. They didn't have all the information, but they had courage. They didn't understand the cost, but they were willing to pay it. And when they looked ahead, they didn't picture a life built only on safety and predictability. They pictured meaning, growth, becoming. So ask yourself honestly, if that version of you could see you now, would they feel proud or confused? We often protect ourselves by saying, I grew up, as if growing up means shrinking expectations, as if maturity means lowering standards, as if responsibility means abandoning passion. But growing up was never meant to mean giving up. Wisdom was supposed to sharpen your vision. OT, replace it with fear. Experience was meant to strengthen you, not silence you. Somewhere along the way, you didn't just adjust the plan. You abandoned the promise without having the courage to admit it. Your younger self understood something you've forgotten. Time is precious. They didn't waste it trying to be liked by everyone. They didn't overthink every step. They didn't wait for perfect conditions. They moved with urgency because they believed life was meant to be lived fully, not cautiously. And now, with all your knowledge, all your experience, all your reasons, you hesitate more than they ever did. And the hardest part, your younger self didn't expect perfection from you. They expected effort. They expected growth. They expected honesty. They knew you would stumble. They knew you would fail at some things, but they never imagined you would stop trying. They never imagined you would make peace with a life that feels unfinished. They never imagined you would become someone who explains instead of executes. Excuses sound intelligent, but they don't satisfy the soul. You can justify why you stayed. You can explain why you settled. You can list all the reasons it didn't work out. But none of that answers the deeper question your younger self would ask. Did you do what you could with what you had? Or did you choose comfort when courage was required? You owe your younger self an explanation because they trusted you with their dreams. They handed them to the future version of themselves. To you, believing you would protect them, fight for them, and at least try to make them real. And trust is sacred. When you break it, something inside you fractures. That's why regret hurts the way it does. It's not about missed opportunities, it's about broken promises. But let me tell you something powerful. The explanation doesn't have to be an apology. It can be a testimony. It can be a turning point. It can be the moment you say, I didn't get it right before, but I'm choosing differently now. Your younger self doesn't need you to go back in time. He needs you to move forward with intention. They need to see that the story didn't end with fear. It's not too late to become someone they would recognize. Not identical, but aligned. Not naive, but brave. Not reckless, but intentional. You don't honor your younger self by recreating their dreams exactly as they were. You honor them by respecting the courage it took to dream at all. By refusing to let that courage die inside you. One day you will look back on this moment as well. The future you will be watching the present you, just like the past version is now. And they will ask the same question. What did you do when you knew better? What did you choose when you were aware? Will you give them excuses or results? You owe your younger self an explanation. Make sure it's one they can live with. Make sure it sounds like action, not avoidance. Make sure it's written in effort, not regret, because the most painful conversation you'll ever have is the one where you realize you became someone your younger self never believed you would be. And the most powerful one is when you decide right now to become someone they're proud of after all.